Superintendent of the Bloomfield Hills School District, Pat Watson, joining us now on the Oakland County Megacast. Superintendent Watson, thank you for being with us today.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? How's your team at Bloomfield Hills Schools?
Doing well. Preparing for what's going to be a very interesting school year.
It absolutely is. The governor and her Return to Learn Council released the My Safe Schools plan last week at a press conference. Your thoughts on the quote-unquote roadmap, as they called it, and how does that make yours and other school districts' efforts in planning easier, tougher, maybe neither?
Well, first and foremost, I appreciate the guidance. Obviously the governor and everyone that was on the task force that worked on the document spent a lot of time. And I also appreciate that there's a lot of leeway. So we know what we have to do, what's required. So that takes some of the guessing out of the game, right? So this is what you have to do. Then it's a matter of looking at the strongly recommended and the recommended steps you could take, and then making decisions as a school district, what is best for our students and our staff as we move forward.
How does the governor's plans mix with Bloomfield Hills School District's plans? Will they have to rework some of your plans, or does that kind of give you the guidelines and you're making your own and they fit together kind of nicely?
So we had a pretty robust plan to begin with. We couldn't wait until we received guidance to figure out what we thought was going to happen and what we needed to do to move forward as a school district. So that includes moving forward and having a virtual option. So whether we're in school, phases 4, 5, and 6, or we're in phases 1 through 3, we know a lot of parents want an online, program for their students. So we've been working on that. And then as far as the additional guidance, we'll pair what the governor released in her roadmap back to school with the plans we already had to make sure we're in compliant. And then it's really working out those individual details of what is it going to look like. She talks about having an area in each building for a student to be quarantined if you feel they're sick and could have COVID or not have COVID. As far as how are they going to get home, and just some of the real small granular pieces, that's really where our focus is going to turn. And that will take quite a bit of time to kind of plan and make sure we've got everything we need to roll out to the community and be ready when that first day of school starts.
Pat Watson, the superintendent of the Bloomfield Hills School District. We've heard from some other school districts that they've had concerned parents that have gone to them and said, regardless of what phase we're in, at least for part of the fall, I'd rather not have my kid in school at all. And they have provisions in place that if you want to have your kid do an entirely virtual learning in the fall, then that's okay. Is there a plan like that in place or something similar to that in place in Bloomfield Hills?
There is. We're calling it Bloomfield Virtual. And so we'll have an information session coming up in the not too near future, not too distant future, rather, so that parents have more information about it. But yeah, that's kind of what I said before. We really have to plan for those parents that want to keep their student home. And some is for health reasons. For other parents, they really feel their students learn better. Or for a couple, they even said, I like having my child at home. I like being able to be kind of the teacher or side by side and help my student along the way. So we'll have that opportunity, but they will have to commit. We'll have an August date where they'll have to make the decision whether they're going with the school plan, which is going to have some face-to-face learning, or they're going to end up going with the plan that is to be home. The only thing we're going to ask of the parents is that they either make a commitment for the semester or they make a commitment for the school year. It's just not feasible with staffing to have students, spend a week in virtual learning, a week off, and go back and forth, 2 days in, a week back at school. So that's something that we'll need a commitment from the parent that they're going to be in.
If the virtual learning program works, do you think this is something that the district would consider keeping post-pandemic?
Absolutely. So a couple things. One, virtual learning is not new. So we know it's been around for quite some time, and there's been different schools that have done it. There's schools that are simply K through 12 nationally that are completely online. But if it's something our parents really enjoy and their students are thriving in it, then it's definitely something we would consider keeping. I mean, our job is to educate our students, right? And if we have a significant or decent portion of parents who are saying, this is what works best for my family, then it's something we would definitely consider keeping. And I think that's pretty much the consensus as I talk to people in Oakland County and outside of the Tri-County area, is the same thing, that if even post-pandemic, if virtual learning is something their parents really and their students really enjoy, that they would look for a way to keep it as well.
On the upcoming ballot, Pat Watson, Superintendent of Bloomfield Hills Schools, there is a bond issue coming up for the Bloomfield Hills School District. Explain to us briefly how that bond would serve the school district and where those funds would go.
Yeah, so every single building would be touched. Would give us an opportunity to refurbish some of the buildings that were built in the 1950s and 60s, and they were built for education at that time. We know education has completely evolved and changed, and we really need 21st century buildings to kind of do what we're trying to do educationally. It would include upgrades to safety, so whether it was the Sally Port entranceways or additional cameras. You always think of things like that for safety, but another thing we're looking at with the safety is relocating all the offices to one spot, so that when you go down, you have the principal's office, you have the secretary, you have the school social worker, you have the school psychologist. A lot of our buildings are really spread out. There's also not a room for a student to have a private conversation. So if a student would come down really upset, that conversation also sometimes has to take place almost in the hallway or just inside the door of the office instead of in a private area. So that would be a couple of the big things. Also, it would give us the ability to right size the school district. Right now, we have 5,500 students in 3 middle schools. Based on the number of students that we have, we really need to be at 2. And that would allow us to go back to a K through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12 configuration. Right now, we have some middle schools that are 4 through 8 or 5 through 8, just simply to fill those spots because of the size of the building. So looking at it from a fiscal standpoint, it really allows us to recapture some of those funds by consolidating into 2 middle schools and then making sure we use those funds for educational programs for all of our students.
And Pat, where can people find more information on this bond issue?
So if they go to bloomfield.org, they'll be able to find information right there. The bond was originally scheduled for a May vote, but we made the decision that it was in the best interest of everyone, including those that would have to go in and work and open all the votes that were cast, that we move it to August. And so we're cautiously optimistic. We did watch the May vote, and we did see that there were, between intermediate school districts and different school districts, that there were 29 potential yes votes out there in 29 different areas. And so all 29 school districts or ISDs did pass their bonds, those 29 for 29. And we also did a little research on March and looked locally, and we know that Birmingham passed a bond in March for $200 million, and that Pontiac schools passed a bond for $147 million in March, with 75% of their community saying yes. So we're cautiously optimistic about going forward with the bond for an August vote this year.
Well, we'll keep up on that information and more about the Bloomfield Hills Schools bond issue with Pat Watson. Thank you for being with us.